Hello there, my name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, also known as Ledev, and now it's time to prepare for a new Hearthstone expansion. One that requires us to do a heist within the city of Dalron, with the assistance of some very powerful Hearthstone villains. It's time for the shadows to rise. Now, obviously the new Hearthstone expansion is coming out April 9th, it's called The Shadow Rises, and there's going to be 135 cards. So there's going to be a lot of cards to review, so this is going to be a multi-part. For this one, we're going to review the first 12 cards that have been revealed so far as of this recording / editing and such. So, as you're probably curious why I'm doing this in the Hearthstone client, well, the main reason is I kind of want to complement the cards that we're reviewing to see what cards can synergize with it within the current meta and such. Plus, well, if you're preparing for a heist, you need to know all the tools of the trade, this so to speak. Nevertheless, though, you'll see the new cards up above the camera up here, and then I'm just going to give individual ratings for the card. Now, the way I rate cards, I do like individual ranks rather than an actual star or a number rate system. The rankings are as follows. There is Amazing, which when a card is amazing, it's a card that I think will absolutely see competitive play. It will see play a lot. It's a card that's just not really costly to play in a deck whatsoever. Like, it's actually highly beneficial to sometimes brew a deck either around the card, or it's just a really safe inclusion, and it's more you get a lot of benefits from even just including it in your deck in general. In other words, it's a card that will see a lot of play within the 2-year cycle that's introduced. Then there's the ranking of Good, which is a card that is practical and safe to toy with in decks, but it's not going to make a deck, or it's not going to be a card to say, how would I phrase this? I'm not going to say that good cards are not necessarily competitively viable, but it's a card that you can at least try in decks, and maybe it can be in a competitive deck sometimes, but it's a card that you can actually take in and out of a deck and not have much detriment. Now there's the ranking of Not That Great, which is a card that has significant weaknesses, but can still be played if the deck is tailored to help with those weaknesses. It can see potential fringe play in some competitive decks, but that's kind of about it, in my general opinion on that. And then there's the rating of Bad, which Bad to me is just a card that I know people like to go into the poetic exaggeration of, oh, a card's so bad that you should dust it for another card, yada yada yada. I don't really like to recommend dusting cards in general, because there are some times where a card will be bad in one meta, but then once the right cards are introduced, it actually changes the card's rating teeny little bits. But I say for bad cards in general, unless you're on a budget and you need to dust a card to get a better card that you want for your deck design, bad cards in general are cards that are set for rare or very fringe meme deck shenanigans. The card itself will probably not see casual or competitive play whatsoever. It's more detrimental to put the card in the deck than actually just have the card out of the deck, so to speak. That's pretty much what a bad card is. Now, nevertheless, let us start this card spoiler review for the master leader of this specific heist, which is Archvillain Reform. A 7-mana 7/8 taunt for Warlock, keep that in mind. And it has a battle cry to replace your hand and deck with legendary minions. Now, one thing to keep in mind, this is actually a very, let me actually just get to all cards so I can show this off, crafting. This is actually a really great homage to Elite Starseeker. For people who have not played with this card in the League of Explorers, it's a really cool card. Essentially, the card, you play the card, it shuffles a map into your deck, then you draw the map, you play the map, it shuffles a golden monkey, you get the golden monkey, you play the golden monkey, which has the exact same battle cry as Archvillain Reform, in this case. Now, many people are making the joke that, oh, it seems like Archvillain Reform ate the golden monkey, or he collected the golden monkey. It depends on which place of the internet you go to for your jokes and memes, but you pretty much probably heard a variation of the joke. Nevertheless, I'll say the main strength of this card is the fact that getting a potentially beneficial late game effect behind a taunt to hopefully protect you to essentially reap the benefits of the battle cry. Mostly in Hearthstone, when you try to play like very late game value-based minions, you want to either have it where it has a significant board effect, like for example, Baron Geddon doing 2 damage or anything, or even like the recent one from Rastakhan Crowd Roaster where it can at least significantly remove a minion. Or you want something that has a significant board presence that can help protect you against aggro, which in this case, Rush Taunt 5/7, Amani Warbear, perfect example. Or even just if we go straight to, say, Hunter, maybe something that helps you finish off the game, like a classic King Crutch. So anyway, minions with high cost, you kind of want to either A, have a significant effect to the board presence, or if they have a powerful battle cry or effect, be protected by a taunt. Like Azalina Soul Thief is a good card in some metas, you could say, but the problem is it's a 7 mana free, and it's not going to be a good finisher if you are going against the aggressive. Kind of like a classic point example in that. And the fact that you have the taunt to at least reap the benefits of the legendary minions that you're going to generate from your hand and into your deck is nothing to underestimate. Now, the main weakness though of the card is definitely the variance that comes with random legendary minions. Yes, in the history of Hearthstone, there are some really good legendary minions. Like, we could say, you could get an Alistraza, you can get a Deathwing, heck, we could even get a Harkar, Undasta, or heck, if we even go and lower the curve, you could even get some really cool, like Exiliats. Like, there's some really cool legendary minions that could help you with as good finishers or ways to help close off a game. On the contrary, there's also some really subpar legendary minions, such as Lorewalker Cho, Millhouse Manastorm, and even some really bad legendaries if we go through all the hero classes that may not help you when you play this in the late game, for a lack of a better word. Now, on the other hand, we should also accommodate that there are legendaries coming from the set, but I do think the same lesson still applies. There's going to be some really good legendaries to pull, and there's just going to be some really bad ones. And just that variance alone is going to be very hard to accommodate for in various board states within the game of Hearthstone. Now, I do see this card potentially seeing play in both Zoo and Control Warlock style decks, just with the simple fact that when you get to late game, both in a Control and both in a Zoo deck, mostly Warlock's cards are kind of dead cards in their hand, whether you're playing Control and you have some dead removal that you can't use right off the bat, or like, say, in Zoo, where there's just some minions that are not going to cut it by playing it in the late game, like they're going to easily get removed or something like that. So you can actually use Archvillain Reform to basically replace what are basically amount to dead cards later in the game to actually hopefully, in a lottery slot kind of way, get some legendaries to hopefully help better accommodate for your board state circumstances, so to speak. Overall, with that circumstances in general, I will say the card is a good card. I think Warlock decks will at least test the card out just because the flashiness of the card in general and the thematics of him being the head cheese of this whole organization thing. It's a flashy card, it has a cool effect, it will probably see some play, and if a competitive deck comes out of it, we'll wait and see. Oh, one mental note before I move on to the next card. It does give Warlock a subtle way to, say, going back to Hikar, replace the Corrupted Bloods to get shuffled into their deck with random legendaries, so just a thought to keep in the back of your brain. Next up, I'm going to go to Rogue for this next card, because while it's not a Rogue card exclusively, you're going to see why I get to it in a minute. It's another legendary, and this one's actually neutral, which is Chef No Mi, a 7-mana sit-sits with a battle cry. If your deck is empty, summon sits Greasefire Elementals. While the payoff to an empty board is pretty significant with this card, I mean, filling your board with sitses is pretty strong. The cat, it's one of those where it's pretty much protected against a majority of board whites within the meta, with the exception of, saying, being Twisty Never, or a very high-powered Flame Strike that's powered by spell damage. However, though, the board state is pretty significant and can be used as a good finisher. However, the catch with this card is the condition. The condition to essentially empty your deck is a very tricky condition to pull off. Now, One thing that people are pointing out is that maybe this card can actually see play in Rogue because you have cards like Myra's Unstable Element, and how you can actually use that as a finisher, in a sense like, let's say, turn 7, you play Myra's Unstable Element, then you play Chef Nomi next turn, and then even if the board gets removed, you can use cards like, say, Academic Espionage to essentially shuffle and still just have cards in your deck to hopefully find other alternates to the game. The catch-22 is, unless you're relying on that finisher, this is a variance deck, and the variance of that victory condition in general is very, very peculiar. I'm just going to say that. It'll be interesting to see if this archetype happens. I think there is a possibility because the power of this legendary is nothing to sneeze at. However, even with that being the case, I still feel like the variance of both having to empty your deck very quick and then have Chef Nomi in your hand, as well as cards to refill your deck if the plan doesn't go according to plan, even with stuff like Shadow Step, I don't know. I think this card is going to get my rating of not that great, but I think you can brew around this card and have fun with it, but I'm not 100% sure it's going to be competitively viable. Still, it's a really cool card design, and apparently a really nice homage to the character in WoW history, which, for me, I'm one of those people who actually played Hearthstone but never played much of World of Warcraft, but apparently everybody who has that I've been essentially listening to or talked about really appreciates this legendary for a lore perspective. It's a very Vorphos card, one could argue. Next up, another legendary character, but also a really, really good legendary card in the WoW of World of Warcraft shenanigans, is Kalecgos, a 10 mana 4/12 that has your first spell each turn costs 0. Well, that's powerful. Oh, and just by the way, it also has a battle cry that you can discover a spell, which if you're playing this on turn 10, means that spell is going to be cast for free. I mean, you can cast a spell if you want to. You could also just hold on it if you want to, because chances are you're going to cast it for free on another turn. Whew. This is probably, in my opinion, the most powerful legendary they revealed from the set so far. The tempo advantage you get from a free spell each turn in Mage is absurd. Hey, cast Board Strike for free? Why not? Cast Luna's Pocket Galaxy for free? Very nice. Play this, the next turn you play Malygos. Playing Malygos. Let's think about this. You can literally just play this on turn 10, and then next turn play Malygos. Oh hey, cast a free Pyroblast for 15 damage. I mean, heck, even when you play the card, the Battlecry gives you a free spell. Presuming you don't coin them out. For the record, many people have made that mistake, apparently, who played with the card during the Hearthstone kind of like preview event that people gone to see what this expansion was about. So, as they say, don't do that. The only main con of the card is, honestly, with the rotation of the Year of the Mammoth, Mage is losing a lot of core cards that were used in their control archetypes. They're losing stuff like Dragon's Fury. They're losing cards like Meteor. They are losing a lot of core cards that were very viable in the control Mage. Also, we could make the argument that they're also just losing their payoff, one of their payoffs for being a control Mage deck, which was Philosopher-Lich Jaina. Which, yeah, that was a significant payoff to be losing with the rotation. However, it will be interesting to see if still a control mage can still be viable with this being the payoff. Because if a control mage can still exist, Kalecgos is a ridiculously good payoff card. I think this card, quote-unquote, if a control mage deck can still exist, or even a mid-range mage deck, you could argue, I think this card will then see competitive play, no sweat, which then in that case, it gets my rating of amazing. It's just a card that the significant advantage you get from its effect is nothing to underestimate, in my personal opinion. Also, one little funny note, this is going to be a card that's going to be very, very hilarious to pull off of, say, I don't know, in Warrior with a Dragon Roar. Just a thought. Next up, a card that I think will still see some competitive play in Shaman, but I'm not sure many people will adore the card, so to speak, is Hagatha's Scheme, a 5-mana spell that has deal 1 damage to all minions. But it upgrades each turn, which for people who don't know, this is part of what's called the Scheme mechanic, which are essentially spells that start off being relatively not that great, but each time you hold it in your hand, it gets upgraded by 1 point. So, for example, if you hold Hagatha's Scheme for a turn, it will be deal 2 damage to all minions, then deal 3, deal 4, 5, 6, etc., etc. Apparently there isn't a cap, so who knows, maybe you can prolong the game, you can make this deal 30 damage to all enemy minions. Okay, here's something you gotta keep in mind. With the Scheme cards, I am going to, at least by first glance for this review series, judge them based on this simple fact. How bad would it feel to top deck the card? And I think it's safe to say, I mean, let's not cut to the chase here. A 5-mana Whirlwind feels really, really, really bad. True, the catch of the Scheme cards is the longer you hold them in your hand, the powerful they get. And there are cards in the meta that modify spell damage, or heck, even if we go back to Shaman, there's a way we can recast the spell, say with Electro Storm Surge, that can make it where even a weaker Hagatha Scheme, like even at 2 and 3, could still be used as a significant board wipe. I'm not denying that. I still just think it's kind of one of those least exciting schemes I've seen so far. I think it still will see a teeny play though, but people are going to miss this card, or at least miss the classic control card they had, which was Volcano. Volcano mostly was a 5-mana spell that just got the job done relatively quick. Now, the benefit Hagatha Scheme has is the fact that you can still use it for later game, and the fact that you don't get overloaded, which is a nice thing to keep in mind. However, it's just kind of one of those... It's one of those I know the later you hold on it, the better it gets, but just a 5-mana top decking, a 5-mana Whirlwind, just feels really bad, and just by that factor alone, I'm going to give it the rating not that great, but with the little caution quotation marks saying I could be wrong. I still think it will still see competitive play in the sense that people do need a 5-mana board wipe, and well, it works, for lack of a better word. I feel like I need to see this card in play to see its impact, but at first glance, it just seems not really great. But like I said, I could be wrong. Next up, one card that I think will see competitive play coming up into Priest, and I don't think many people are going to complain about playing this card. Probably many people who are playing against it though, which is the Forbidden Words. It's a 0-mana spell that says spend all your mana, and then destroy a minion with that much attack or less. So, this is a really, really nice callback to Whispers of the Old Gods. And as they mentioned in their kind of like press and such, they are going to have a couple of these callback cards. For many people who have not played during the Whisper of the Old Gods, this is an homage to the Forbidden Cycle, which basically, as you could probably guess, were 0-mana spells that you could put a minimal amount of mana into, depending on how many mana crystals you have left, so to speak, and you get an effect. Like, for example, the original card that this is, that was in the original expansion was Forbidden Shaping, which was spend all your mana, and then summon a random minion that costs that much. Honestly, while this card's seen little play in the Toolbotsy Priest control decks that try to use the Mean Streets of Gadgetzan / Shadow Reap of Annuin, I always forget the name of the card, but essentially the one that makes your hero power 0, and then they use Shadow Reap of Annuin to essentially make a Toolbots deck to hopefully just ping and burst to the lethal damage of being able to go boop, 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 boop with the hero power and such. So, besides that, it was still kind of a meme-y card. On the contrary, though, the card we're getting from this expansion is anything but. To put it in other words, just put it simply, it's unconditional removal, as long as you have the mana to pay for it. Now, granted, the main con is, one thing that should be pointed out, that it can only destroy creatures of the mana crystals you spent into it, and you can only have 10 maximum mana crystals, so let's be frank, it's a card that, for the most part, it's not going to kill something like a Deathwing, or maybe a card that gets buffed up through various shenanigans to have an attack power higher than 10. That is something to keep in mind. However, Priest still has other removal spells, like for example, they do have Shadow Word of Death. Let's not cut to the case of that. They do have that. I always have to do. They do have Shadow Word of Death, and then they also have Shadow Word of Pain. So I feel like it's going to be within this deck archetype. They're going to play a combination of these free spells, with the absolutely no sweat that they're going to play Forbidden Words. Because to put it frankly, it does one thing that Priest had struggled with for a long time. It finally can kill. We have a removal spell to kill 4 attack minions. Oh my. If you, on the days of Children Letty, if you were telling them that, like, years later they're going to get a removal spell to actually destroy this card, many people would be jumping up and down in excitement. But mostly, realistically, it's more going to be used to destroy the Twilight Drakes of this world, or the other 4 attack minions that people will probably play just for board presence significance in general. Still, I think this card will see competitive play, and just by that factor alone, it gets a rating of amazing. It's just a really good unconditional removal spell. Really, only the condition being how much mana you put in it, obviously. But still, I would be really surprised if this does not see play. It's just that really good of a card. Next up, another card that's actually kind of cool is the Spellwood Jewel. I always pronounce it wrong, so forgive me on that. The Spellwood Jewel, a 3-mana 3/4 that has the battle cry that your hero can't be targeted by spells or hero powers until your next turn. Honestly, it's just a nice tech card against specific archetypes that target the player, aka Burn Mage, Mid-Range Hunter, etc. It is worrying to note that it does not counter cards like Mind Blast, so like Malygos, Priests. Still, you have troubles against that, and this card's not going to help you against that other than protecting you against Holy Smites and such. So it's something to keep in mind. I am still grateful that this card exists as a functional tech card to keep Malygos in check if the meta calls for it. Also, I do like one aspect of this card that seems a little unassuming at first. It's a tech card that has decent stats. Now, with the exception of a few cards like Spellbreaker and such, a majority of tech cards in general are usually not given that great of stats. Like, I think the classic one we could think of is our old Mr. Owl here, Mr. Hoot Hoot, which a 3-mana 2/1 is not really great to feel like a 2/1. Or the more recent example, if we go all the way back to Boomsday, where we feel like, oh, do we need EMP or essentially ways to destroy mechs, and the ones they give us is, let me see, it's in A, B, C. Aha! They give us a tech card with a 5-mana 3/3. Yeah, I mean, granted, great arena card still, in some circumstances, don't get me wrong, but still, for constructed, just these tech cards that have very lowered stats is just, does not ever feel good to put in your deck. However, on the contrary, with Spellwood Jewel, just the fact that you get the decent stats for being a 3-mana 3/4, it's fine. It's, if you're not going against a Burn Mage archetype, then you can just still play it as a 3-mana 3/4 and still have decent board presence. And that's what makes this card the epiphany of a good card. It might see competitive play if the meta calls for it, but if it doesn't, it's still just a safe card to keep in your deck when the meta calls for it, at the very least. Next up, we're going all the way to Druid, and Druid is not actually part of the bad guys this time around. They're actually part of the good guys of the Defenders of Dalaran. And they get their own exclusive little mechanic called Twin Spell. Now, the Defender of Dalaran, pretty much those who are part of that cycle, which in this case it's, I believe, Druid, Paladin, Mage, and Hunter, they get what we theorize, just they're probably going to each get a spell of this mechanic. And what Twin Spell basically amounts to, it's that essentially you have 2 copies of the spell within a card, so to speak. So you cast this first instant of the spell, and then it will generate a copy within your hand, A thing to keep in mind, it generates it within the same position that it was originally in the hand, a copy of the spell that doesn't have twin spells, so you can essentially cast the spell twice, so to speak. And the Force Aid is an 8 mana twin spell that has summon 5 2/2 treants. While this card is not exactly exciting for Druid, honestly, it's a perfectly functional for the Token Druid archetype. The twin spell mechanic does help with the playability of the card quite a lot, since you copy the spell in the hand to play it if they respond with a board wipe with the initial casting. That's just the main strength in general. Like a majority of Token Druid archetypes, the basic archetype basically amounts to build a board presence, hope it doesn't get board wipe, and then go with a Savage Roar and such. But with this spell, it actually allows for lack of better words, kind of insurance policy. Sure, I can cast this spell. Oh, you're going to remove it? Oh, hey, I have the second copy in hand. And the players have to keep that in mind. So, in theory, their token generation outlets will outlast the removal spells that most decks run, which in general is around 3 to 4, board-wise specifically. So just by that fact, it would be brain fart, sorry. It would feel really silly to cast it, and then next turn cast, say, how I phrase this. It's one of those where you cast it first, and then it gets board wiped, and then you cast the next one, and if that one doesn't get answered, well, Druid's been getting a lot of support with treants in general, so heck, Tree Speaker, that's said on that. Or even, you could probably just go for the lethal, and then just do Savage Roar, and then hopefully do a significant amount of damage. Which, if I do the math on this, 5 to 2 treants, that's 4, 5, 6... Yeah, that's about 30 damage with the tokens alone, so yeah. I feel like this is just a card that will make Token Druid just a tad bit more competitive. And it just does that job nicely. It's a classic case of a card that is more playable than taken at first glance. So, yeah, and with that, I would say the card's good. I think it might have a good chance to see competitive play if Token Druid exists within the current meta. It's just really good card the more you think about it, honestly. Next up, we go all the way back to Rogue again with the Evil Miscreant, which is a 3 mana 1/5 minion that has combo, add 2 random lackeys to your hand. Now you might be asking, what are lackeys? Lackeys are exclusive minions within this expansion, and we're going to get more throughout the year, that are essentially 1-drops that have very, very powerful battle cries in exchange of being 1/1s. So for example, we get one that's like a 1 mana 1/1 discover a spell, or one that deals 2 damage, one that evolves a minion, one that summons a random 2-drop, etc, etc. I'll probably have them up above the card itself just to show the power of these. These are 1-drops that if the players had the choice, they would put them in their deck within the accommodating archetypes without a sweat. But these cards are generated from cards within the expansion. Like, for example, this card, which essentially, if you can combo with the card, which for those who have not played Hearthstone, means if you played a card before this and then play this card, the combo trigger goes off, which in this case, it's adding 2 of these random lackeys to your hand. Honestly, the lackey mechanic in general for rogues seem to be a very, very positive mechanic. Since you're generating 1/1s with an upside that costs 1 mana, those cards can be used to help combo with other cards. The classic examples we can think of right off the bat. There is just the Eviscerates. There's also just, say... I don't know, really popular one comes to mind, Edward Van Cleef, or even just something as simple as just the SI Agent. Just the fact that they can be used to help combo with other cards, and even help with battlecry synergies in general, for Pete's sakes. Imagine lackeys and combo cards with Spirit of the Shark. Like having Spirit of the Shark out, and then playing Evil Miscreant with its combo trigger, you generate 4 lackeys into your hand, which in those lackeys, as long as Spirit of Sharks is on the battlefield, will generate their battle cries twice. That is very, 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 very silly and absurd. Now, the absolute con of the card is the variance of the random lackeys in general, and whether or not that variance will help you within the variety of board states that can happen in Hearthstone. It's kind of a roundabout way, kind of like how Archvillain Reform has with legendary minions, in a sense. Still, I am very excited to play the card and put put it into my Spirit of the Shark Shenanigans style decks. So with that in all, I'm gonna give the card rating of good. I think even with the stats itself being debatable, I think the card, just with the lackey mechanic in general, and just the way she can, for lack of a better word, do some really, really silly shenanigans, I think the card will at least see experimentation at the very least, and it's safe to experiment with. Sorry, doing this a little late at night. So it's safe to experiment with it, and that, as you noticed before, is my epiphany of a good card. One note I do want to go off with before we get to the next card with lackeys in general. Since all the lackeys are battle cries, and the lackeys are going to be in the villain classes, which in this case is Shaman, Warlock, Priest, and Warrior? I believe I'm missing one. Let's see. Shaman, Warlock. I feel like I'm really forgetting one. Okay. Let me just go through it this way. It is not Druid, not Mage, Priest, Rogue, Shaman, and Warlock, and Warrior. So yeah, just the initial... Hey, wait a minute. 1, 2, 3, 4. I wonder if that was intentional, just to make the villains just this kind of... Okay, that's more coincidence by correlation. Where was I going with? Oh yeah. The factor that Shaman can benefit from the Battlecry synergies of Lackey with some very specific cards, just to keep in mind. That's all I'm saying. Okay, next up, we're going to get to another scheme card that actually got revealed, and going back to Rogue for this one, which is Todd Waggle scheme. So Todd Waggle is the villain of the Rogue class, essentially. And it's a 1-mana spell that has choose a minion, shuffle 1 copy of it into your deck, and as we mentioned before with schemes, it can upgrade each turns in your hand. So maybe it could be shuffle 2, shuffle 3, shuffle 4 copies of a target minion. Nope, it can be your minion, but it also can be an enemy minion as well. So if we go still by the same metrics of, would this be a good card to top deck as I've been doing with these schemes? This is actually not a bad top deck. The spell is cheap enough to help activate combos. You can shuffle a potentially powerful minion of your own or the opponents in your deck to get Raider. I think many people are going to ironically get really greedy with this card and try to upgrade it to absurd levels, when in reality, you just get a really good tempo advantage by just playing the card right off the bat as soon as you get the good tempo advantage with a really good combo spell. So, granted, the power of the card is that you can still hold on it and wait for the factor that once you get that tempo advantage with a combo card, which then makes the card significantly more powerful because then you shuffle more copies in. It's one of those cards that you can use early game, but you can also use late game, which actually makes the card very, very, very good. And yes, we all know the meme case of the classic, oh hey, I can use this to shuffle 10 Pogo Hoppers into my deck and use it as a finisher. Oh. But honestly, I think a majority of the card will see play. It's just, say, shuffle maybe 1 or 2, maybe even 3 copies of, say, Test Greymane, so you can combo with, I don't know, like an Edwin Van Cleef. That's, or maybe even an Eviscerate, since we don't have to worry about 2-mana spells, not putting 2-mana spells in our deck to not upset the Keliseths of the world, which that card's rotating out, which I'm very grateful of, so that we can actually play with our 2-mana rogue spells again. Yay! But that was a little sidetracked there. Still, I am not 100% sure if the card will see competitive play. Still, I think it's a safe card to scheme with within your deck designs. And with that, the card's good. Next up, a new legendary for Shaman, which, as we mentioned before, the villains are each getting their own card. Hagatha, as part of the Shaman class, is getting her own card, which is Swamp Queen Hagatha. A 7-mana 5/5 that has a battle cry to add a 5/5 horror to your hand and teach it to shaman spells. Now, what they mean by when you teach it a shaman spell, you essentially are going to discover a spell first and then discover a second spell. Clarification, the first spell can be any random shaman spell and can also be one that can target a minion. But the second spell is always going to be a universal spell that can't target something. But there is also the possibility that the first spell you can discover can also be a universal spell as well. But as far as I'm aware, the second spell you discover will never be a targeted spell. Just because of the Battlecry interaction and the really cool interaction with this card, how you can actually target something with the Battlecry. So keep that in mind. The versatility of this legendary, in my eyes, that can provide is really, really silly. Just being able to generate a card that will cast 2 random shaman spells of your choice is really nifty. It's just one of those scenes where it's like, it reminds me of the toolbox days of Mage or even in Priest or such, when we play stuff like Kazakus and such. And just kind of like customizing our own little spell. Now this one, you just have a variety of shaman spells, which, let's be frank, some of them are really, really good, and some of them are just, well, they're totemic might. Enough said on that one. But still, just the fact that you can have the ability to customize your own spell and cast 2 of them, it's just really cool. And just it being a Battlecry helps synergize with Battlecry shenanigans. I mean, heck, Shredder Walk, enough said of that. And there's just some silly spell synergies you can just go off with by just casting 2 of them at the same time. You can, for example, let me think of something right off the bat. You can say, for Shaman, I think one of the silliest ones I could think of is you can have your first spell be a Rain of Toads, and then cast a Stormbringer, which then when you play the 5/5 makes you play the Horror, and then summon the Frog tokens, and then get 4 random legendaries, presuming that you have an empty board. That is just ridiculously absurd. Now, one of the main cons of the card, I will say, is the fact that it is, in general, a 7-mana 5/5, and even with a really cool Battlecry that this card does have, I think still it's going to be tricky to play within some metas, especially if the meta is going to be an aggressive one. The other con I can think of is, as I mentioned before, the variants of shaman spells, which I can say some of them are really powerful and cool, while some of them are very subpar and just kind of meh. The epitome of very meh. I mean, I feel sorry for the person who has to select a horror that's going to be a totemic might and then a Hagatha scheme. Though if they do find a way to actually make that work and actually help them get lethal, that will be a trolled video to see without a sweat. Still, it's a really cool design for a legendary card, and I really can't wait to play with it. And with that, I'm going to give the card rating good. It's a card I think you can safely experiment within some metas and still have fun with it, because it's a really cool design for a legendary. Don't underestimate that. Next up, we get to a really peculiar priest card, which is Lazuli's Scheme. Which, for clarification, for people who are wondering who this Lazuli is, since I didn't talk about it earlier, Lazuli is actually the fortune teller from Whispers of the Old God for people who watch the original trailer. So, for those who don't know, that's Lazuli. And Lazuli has a scheme which is a 0-mana spell that says reduce the attack of an enemy minion by 1 until your next turn, and as we mentioned with schemes before, it upgrades each turn. So it could be reduce 2, reduce 3, reduce 4, reduce 5, etc., etc., etc. Now, yes, if we go by the metric of would this feel bad the top deck, some might argue that this would feel really bad compared to Hagatha's Scheme. Honestly, I am not so sure about that. Remember, this is a 0-mana spell, and usually in priests in general, cheap spells are nothing to underestimate. Especially with stuff like Adjacent Archneer, or even just... Honestly, this is just a 0-mana combat trick which can help you with an efficient trade. And sometimes you being able to protect a minion by just reducing the minion they have to attack into by 1 attack can be pretty significant. Plus, there's also just some really nifty 2-card combos you can do with it. Like, let's say you hold onto the card and make it where it has 2 attack or less. Hey, Cabal Shadow Priest wants to change that minion's mind. And let's be frank, if you're able to do that to a very powerful minion, that's pretty cool. Plus, also the other combo that people are mentioning is with, say, if you're able to reduce its attack to 0, you can topsy-turvy and remove the minion. And as many people are pointing out, well, really 2-card combos are not that fancy. Honestly, they're kind of the bread and butter of Priest. Many people who played Priest in the past, and even in the current, will know that Priests in general are the epiphany of 2-card combos. Let's just not kid ourselves there. Now, it's going to feel really good to play these combos, and with that, while I'm not sure if the card will see competitive play per se, I still think it's definitely going to be a card more powerful than taken at first glance, and at least will be experimented with. And with that, I think it's an epiphany of a good card. And the last card we're going to talk about before we end this part 1 of this review series, it is the Hunter legendary minion, which is the 6-mana Oblivitron, which is a 3/4 mech, so 6 mana 3/4, but it has a death rattle to summon a mech from your hand and trigger its death rattle. Okay, I think it's best to get this out of the way, get my rating out of the way, and point at it before people kind of get glances at it. I know. Look, just hear me out on this, okay? Just please hear me out. 6 mana for a 3/4, even with the death rattle that it has, does not feel great. Just don't get me wrong on that. However, when you look closely at the mechs we have in the expansions, like within past expansions and even in this current standard cycle, there is some really powerful death rattles to synergize with this legendary minion. Like, case in point, the ones I could think of right off the bat is, there's the classic ones, like, say, imagine being able to trigger off a free weaponized pinata. Yeah, many people are I feel kind of question marky saying, well, this is not a really weak effect to trigger, and I kind of have to tilt my head sideways and be like, no, that's a good effect to trigger off for free with Oblivitron. I mean, getting a random legendary in your hand, yes, we still have to go back to, ironically, Archvillain Reform, random legendary can be variance, and variance is costly. But still, just the fact that we have cards that have powerful death rattles in general, like Mechanical Whelps, heck, even a Spark Drill can be decent. Or even just, here's the thing I think I will just say. I feel like this is a card that will give a significant tempo advantage just from that death rattle alone if you can trigger it. Which, in Hunter in general, they do have ways to trigger it. Like, for example, the one thing I can think of right off the bat is, say, Fireworks Tech. So even having like an 8-mana play where you play the Oblivitron and then play Fireworks Tech to trigger it, and then it brings out another death rattle minion that triggers, I feel like the tempo advantage you're going to get from that is very, very significant. Plus, keep in mind, we also have cards like Cybertech Chip, which allows us to get random mechs. So, one thing that had been confirmed that I wanted to dig and make sure to clarify, you can also summon a random mech that doesn't have death rattle. And to just put it bluntly, there's just some powerful mechs that if you can get very, very early that are in the high power range, just from the random effect as I mentioned before, it can be ridiculously absurd. Like, you could get a Berryvium Nullifier. You could also just get, like, say, I don't know. I know many people are just making the joke that you could get a megaphone off it, but it won't technically trigger the combo since megaphone will still be on the battlefield. Still, that is a 6 to 8 mana 10/10 you play on hopefully turn 7 or 8. That is significant, and unless the opponent has removal, can also be used for a very good finisher. Heck, we even have some common cards like Bulldozer that you can cheap out, and just having that board presence, presuming the opponent doesn't have removal, is very significant. Or heck, even stuff like small stuff, like we have Spider Bomb. Think about triggering off a free Spider Bomb to destroy a problematic minion. I mean, I could keep going on with this. I think the card is one of the most underrated and going to be overlooked cards in the expansion. Like, I see many people giving this average of 3 or less stars. Honestly, I think the card will see competitive play, whether or not in this meta. I think the mech package in general are going to be supported a lot more. I mean, heck, even the Death Rattle package is still being supported within this meta, just with Necro Mechanic alone in the standard meta. I think the card will see competitive play, and I am going to keep up with my rating of it being amazing. I could be totally wrong, but I'm going to bet my gut on this one. Metaphorically speaking, of course. Though, granted, who knows? At least it'll be a funny if I get this card wrong. At least the top 5 cards I get wrong if I ever do those type of videos as such. So, who knows? Nevertheless, that's the cards that have been revealed so far. I'll keep continuing on with this card review series with how many cards that get revealed. We got a lot to go through with 135, so I hope you all enjoy this series. You all have a lovely day or evening, depending where you're at. And this is LedDev, signing out.